all of us have a big part in the wine industry, and that's why this is an all-star lineup. And thank you all for being here. As far as the writing core and the great publishers and all the people that are part of this conversation today. And it's just a fun thing that you could join us today. So, what brought me here is obviously I got to know Christi and Dave, and I already knew Bill from his Paradox days, but because of Goose Cross, I think that really what really made me fascinated about that brand was State Lane. If you go to Yountville and you get down on the Yountville corridor there, and you take a little left on this road called State Lane, it's out there. It just kind of hangs between the town of Yountville and Silverado Trail. It is a fascinating little area, but I think that really, starting to get to know that brand and what Bill was doing there and what Christi had in mind for this kind of bigger brand and making this into restarting a brand that had been pretty much an earthy kind of really conservative brand, but giving it some style, some class. Everything that she did was brilliant. But I think that the real key to any time that you start a winery, especially a boutique winery, it is really all based on how good is the fruit that you're working on. You could have the most beautiful place ever. It could look great. You could have the best view ever. But if you don't have great fruit, chances are that wine will not be that great. Just so happens that State Lane is in a very, very special place in Napa Valley. It is technically where Goose Cross is technically Yountville. But actually where we're talking about with the game farm is actually just over the border, and it's really right there in Oakville. It's off the same road, and to be really honest, it's State Lane, and then the Rector Creek is right there. So you have an area that I think that my greatest time of getting to know this little small brand that came out of a little bit bigger brand was when Deborah Parker Wong and I got to take a walk with Bill, and we got to go to this vineyard. We just walked down the road. That was it. It was a fantastic voyage, and I think Deborah is probably nodding her head right now, going, "That was pretty fun," because it was. We got to go to a place that's a little magical vineyard, and it just so happens that Alex, the owner, was there, and that was not announced. He was just there showing some people around. So I felt like, I got the character of this vineyard right off the bat. And I think that really tasting through these wines, as we set this up, I mean, to be really honest, everyone, we'd love to have you in Napa Valley, actually walking in this vineyard with us, but we can't do that. So bringing it to you is really our job today. And so as the moderator, I'm going to have some fun with playing around, find some fun facts for you, really get into the conversation and be the kind of the promoter of certain points that we're taking. But the fact is, really what brings people to Napa Valley or wine country in general is passion for wine. And I think that, Christi and Dave are two extraordinarily passionate people who loved wine, who wine brought them together, wine brought us together. And I think what you're going to see in these glasses that we've got poured here, and the personality of each one of these vintages is going to be very dynamic. But there's a core thing that really happens here, is that the core is, this is from a specific vineyard, the game farm. And the other little point here that's really interesting, and I think makes this really worth talking about, besides the love of wine and how we can pair this with Valentine's Day and all these great things about this and the food pairings I'm going to bring up later, is the fact that we are talking about American oak. Oh, did I just say that? Yeah, I did. You betcha. This is American time. I mean, we just had inauguration. There are certain things that stand out. I mean, if you saw Amanda Gorman speaking her poetry, I mean, that stood out. If you saw things like Bernie Sanders in all of his memes yesterday, that stood out. Well, this today is going to be not only an exploration of a specific vineyard and the profile of different vintages. And as we're going to find out, there's a special thing at the end here that's a charitable thing that we're going to talk about, and how, really the whole design of this wine is also to give back to the community, and that has to do with the fires. You guys, we had fires here. I think we all know that 2017 was a very, very rough year, but this past year, pretty rough too. But there are ways and there are things that we really do to give back to the community. So with that being said, I'm going to drop back because you got to find out the real story from Christi and Dave about the love of wine. Take it away, you guys.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Chris, for the lead in, and Lisa, we appreciate it. And thank you all for being here. I really appreciate you taking Friday morning or afternoon for those of you that are on the East Coast to spend some time with us and learn a little bit about our brand and what we're all about. We're going to tell you a little bit about the story of how C. Elizabeth came to be, but what we're affectionately calling the long letter is in your press packets. So feel free to refer back to that as you need to. You want to start?
Absolutely, sure. So thank you, by the way. Thank you all for being here. Honestly, it's really humbling looking at this screen, seeing all the names and faces up here. We follow what you guys do, and we're really thankful that you're here to interact with us. Yeah, we were newly engaged, out looking at houses, doing things, decided we were going to live in Napa. I was working in Napa, and Christi was kind of working in Northern California. We thought this would be a good spot to live. And we were out one night, rainy night, and having a glass of wine after looking at some houses and kind of talking about our jobs and that sort of thing. And we're the only people sitting in the bar at Bistro Gentil. And the bartender starts interacting with us, and we're trying some interesting wines. And we try T-Vine, which we heard the story about Greg Brown, the winemaker, so on and so forth, and kind of his love story with his wife. And we kind of looked at each other and said, we're both doing the things we're doing, but we don't necessarily have that level of passion for what we're doing. We had perfectly good jobs, but we wanted to do something more, something that we were more connected to. And we vowed that we would. And we didn't know exactly what it would be or how it would look. We just knew it would be in wine, and we knew it had to matter to us. And that was really sort of one of the genesis kind of conversations surrounding C. Elizabeth. There's some folklore that surrounds kind of what happened after, because as we started getting more specific about what we were going to do with the project, we have differing opinions on where that actually started to take form. I'm pretty sure it was a birthday dinner at Girl and the Fig.
And I'm pretty sure it was an anniversary dinner at our first anniversary, I think, at Sauvignon. That's not around anymore. But.
So we casually kind of kicked that one around a little bit. We're not exactly sure. I'm pretty sure I'm right, and she's pretty sure she's right. So, but the bottom line is, over 3 or 4, 6 years, we started kind of bringing this brand to life, and the name is a really important piece of it. And Christi, you might want to tell more on that.
Yeah. So I'm C. Elizabeth. For those of you who don't know, my full name's Christian Elizabeth. So I'm C. Elizabeth, but there's 3 other Elizabeths that are in my lineage. My grandmother was Elizabeth. My mom's middle name is Elizabeth, and my daughter's Elizabeth. We call her Lucy, but her first name's Elizabeth. And we're all kind of a little bit of a difficult to deal with, a little headstrong. And we thought, how great would it be to make a big, beautiful wine that is an ode to all these big, strong, headstrong women in our lineage?
So look, I think that's a fair assessment. I think to our daughter, the youngest Elizabeth, and she's a perfect example. But honestly, really, really beautiful people, pioneers, have done things, kind of gone against the grain at times to try for the greater good. And we wanted to build something that was sort of an ode to people that do that sort of thing, specifically in our lives. So this was really built for our friends and family. We wanted to build a wine that we loved and that we loved to drink with people that we love. So that's what See Elizabeth, how it started. It had many different little iterations and explorations. And I won't steal some of the thunder on Game Farm, but we looked around for 5 years up and down the West Coast. Luckily, we were able to travel to some great vineyards and wineries and see what people were doing, but we wanted to find what was just right, and we couldn't find it. And one thing that happened while we were in that search was I was working with Lisa also at Treasury, Behringer Blass, Foster's, but I had the great opportunity to be exposed to all sorts of wines that I had never been exposed to before, specifically a lot of Australian wines, a lot of New World wines that were made in kind of a more elegant fashion. And in those travels, both with the wines we worked on, Wolf Blass, Saltram, wines like that, I was also able to drink a lot of other wines. And one wine that really struck a chord with me and then Christi was Penfold's Bin 707, which we couldn't figure out what it was about it that we found so special. But the more we looked into it, it was this combination of the way the fruit was handled and then the way it interacted with what was predominantly New American oak. And that was sort of a light bulb moment, I guess, for us, because we had been, as I had been working in the wine industry, you hear about French oak, and deservedly, it's an awesome, awesome component to many wines. But the American oak story I hadn't really heard told. And so that started some of our exploration into that, and then coming back to Ridge, Montebello, and some of the other great producers that do really unique things. But one thing that we came away with from that was, just like all French oak barrels are not created equally, neither are American oak barrels. So we needed to find out more. And we really liked that profile, really liked it. And we wanted to explore that further. So that became part of our journey. And eventually that became, a charge that we connected with Bill on from a winemaking perspective. We thought that was a secret ingredient if used properly.
Yeah.
And we're going to tell a few more stories before we get into formally talking about the wines. But if you want to start tasting, you're more than welcome to. And as Chris will tell you, over the course of an hour, these wines evolve and change and become these beautiful wines. So feel free to start sampling if you would like.
Yeah.
You don't have to wait for the official.
And I think that the other thing too is you guys get some of this amazing wine in your glass, and as it develops there, you'll really get to taste the differences as it matures. But I think that the great thing for you guys is you got these bottles to enjoy this weekend too, and really continue to explore this and how these flavors develop here. But getting into a new subject, like I said, it really does start with a vineyard. So in this case, you've got this sheet in your bags, or sorry, in your folders. And this is really a Game Farm. And this is an amazing little map. It doesn't need to be big because it's not that big. It's a very small little vineyard in comparison to a lot of the bigger spaces in Napa Valley. But I think that point of where it is located, it really does have an interesting hook. If you look at it, where Oakville actually does curve a little bit into the Yountville area, and it's really just right past Goose Cross on State Lane. And that was the interesting thing about how Bill became a part of this. And for those of you that know the Paradox label, Bill has been a great person that really woke us up in a lot of stuff. And Bill is running around with his plumber right now, so he will be right back. Oh, there he is. Just talking behind your back, Bill. But the thing is that we were just talking about the amazing Game Farm, and more specifically, and if you look over your notes in the folder that we sent you to, I think the most important thing is about this one little spot, and where this whole idea started is this one little parcel here called the Rock Pit. So Rock Pit. Wow, what a rough, scruffy name, rough in every way. We thought it was kind of a joke as Deborah and I walked there. Oh, but we found out real quick, it is rocky as you get. I mean, the thing that it kind of reminds me of is being in the Chateauneuf-du-Pape and really walking on those stones and like thinking that you're gonna sprain your ankle just walking on it. That is what it looks like there. Bill, tell us a little bit about how you first came across this amazing site, and actually how Alex and you became best friends. And it just so happens that this was all fate. Who would have known?
Yeah, so hello everyone. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, basically I met Alex when I was working for Duckhorn. He was one of the first growers for Duckhorn, and when I came on board, he was still supplying Duckhorn vineyards in particular with fruit, Merlot, Sauvignon Blanc, and Semillon. And then the Paradox facility, the winery, is at the Rector Creek Vineyard, and the northern boundary is Rector Creek, which is the northern boundary of Yountville and you cross over and you enter into Oakville. And on the other side of Rector Creek is the Game Farm Vineyard. So whilst avoiding rattlesnakes along the creek, I would look over and see Alex's vines and wonder, what they were like, because there was just this incredible rock profile. I mean, the head-size rocks, there's no topsoil whatsoever in the rock pit. And we know it goes down at least 25 feet. It's just pure rock. Duckhorn was getting Merlot actually from the trail side block. So I'd done a little bit of work with that was mostly going up the road, not coming to Paradox. So I had an idea of how Alex grew fruit. Alex Viborni is quite the character. He's pretty old school, which I really like. We don't have a contract with him. We have a handshake agreement. He's just old school and has a feel for what is the right thing to do. I think from a business standpoint, but also in terms of how to grow grapes. Alex graduated UC Davis, plant science, focused on viticulture back in 1969. So he knows what he's doing. He's been around a while and gone through a lot of trials and tribulations with Mother Nature and the business of growing grapes. He doesn't make wine, he grows grapes. The rock pit was planted in 1991, so we're up to 30 years now. So there's some nice vine age in there, and to me, it was just the uniqueness of the site that was really intriguing, because having worked for Paradox and Duckhorn, I got to know the valley very well, and there's no other soil profile like it. It's the old wash of Rector Creek, and hence the river rock that's in there.
That's great. I think as we start off here and tasting this 2014, this was the beginning of this whole program here. The C. Elizabeth started from the 14 vintage. 14 vintage, a very good vintage, very showy vintage for most people. But I think that really, because of this site, it really, it's really about this personality of this site. And this is really the opening intro that I got to this label, was because of this 2014. It also has that touch of American oak. Tell us a little bit about your background of working with American oak. I mean, I know that you did in New Zealand, and there were parts of the program for Paradox and Duckhorn that had it there too. But what made you pick out these specific barrels?
So I've been working with American oak from different coopers since 1998. New Zealand fruit, and then obviously when I moved here, predominantly with the Zinfandel for the Paradox program. But the interesting thing was, when I joined Christi at Goose Cross, and we were just talking about what else other plans she had, and she, that's when she first told me about C. Elizabeth and a couple other crazy ideas that Dave had and has. I said, okay, what do you want to do with this wine? And she's like, well, we wanted to see if we can do something in American oak, which I thought was really cool because it's a great point of difference for the wine, and also it's a challenge. And one thing about Christi and Dave is they both like to set themselves and embrace challenges, and I like that as well. So I thought that'd be really cool to see if we can make a pretty epic Oakville Napa Valley Cabernet Sauvignon using 100% American oak. So, one of the things with American oak, and I guess one thing I was a little concerned with, I knew Game Farm, but I knew it with Merlot. I hadn't worked with Cabernet. So it wasn't that we chose the Game Farm Vineyard and fruit because we were using American oak. I just liked it because I thought it's another unique site, which could offer a point of difference for us. And so, I was a little apprehensive and nervous about whether they would actually work together, American oak and the fruit from that vineyard. So we started off in 14 and 15 as well. It's a small program, guys. It's essentially 10 barrels. We actually get more fruit than we need, and that's allowed us to do some research and some development, and be very selective when we come to the final blending. But we started off with a fairly broad spectrum of American oak suppliers, and also the wood. So we looked at some northern, we looked at Pennsylvania, Minnesota, Missouri, which I guess those are like your four main regions where American oak for wine is sourced. So we looked at those, and in 14, there was some pretty extensive barrel tastings and blend tastings to find out what worked. The 14, I'm actually really liking it today. When we first released it, it was pretty tight, and I was a little concerned about whether we'd maybe been a little bit too assertive with some of the oak character in there. And we saw that, through the barrel aging process. And so we started morphing with the 15 towards it to see if we get a slightly softer American oak characteristic. So, American oak, there's not a lot of tannin in it. It tends to be a little bit sweeter than French oak, but perhaps the flavor profiles were just a little bit too overpowering of the fruit. And one thing with the rock pit fruit is because of those rocks, you get really nice ripeness, but there is a fragility and elegance to the fruit. So you've got to be a little bit careful that you don't overpower that. I'll talk about that a little bit more when we talk about introducing trail side. But I was just a little concerned that we would overpower the fruit. And so, in 15, we kind of just morphed things a little bit. We started using barrels that had been, where the stave would have been aged longer. And so the lignans leach out a little bit more, and you get a slightly softer, more restrained barrel style.
Yeah. I think that, Leslie just asked, what's the difference in the barrels over the four vintages? Is there much of a difference, or is it the time period, how long you keep it in there, or how did you kind of go about that?
The time period is pretty much the same. I think we're hovering 19 to 22 months each vintage, and that's really but tasting the wines and barrel on a pretty regular basis, and just waiting to see when the best integration is, and we're finding that's a sweet spot. I think from 14 we kind of centered on a couple of barrels. We certainly got rid of a few barrels after the 14, the style that we didn't like, but we went for Pennsylvania source from One Cooper. Actually for AP John, who are one of the main suppliers for Penfolds in the bin 707, Dave. So the AP John Pennsylvania barrel, which is also water bent. So when they fire the barrel, they do it in a moist environment, or they soak the staves prior. And that just gives you a little bit more elegant, creamier mid palate sort of characteristic. contribution from the barrel. So that's been a core, actually. We like that in 14, and we've kept that as one of the core barrels. And then in 14, actually came across a barrel where the stave would have been aged for 4 years. Most American oak is aged for 2 years. Back at Paradox, we actually did trial work and it went to a 3-year aged barrel in terms of the stave wood, just because it's a little bit more elegant. And then some of the Coopers have been offering this 4-year wood, which is even more elegant. So they're essentially the 2 core barrels for the wine.
Great. You know, and I think that when I think about American oak and how it's progressed, I mean, it really has been a 20-year process. I remember writing a story some years ago for Tasting Panel, and really the focus of that was some of the producers that we know that have been using American oak are Silver Oak, Ridge, obviously, Peter Michael. I mean, some great brands, but it's their use of American oak. We have it here. It is America. We can do this. And we look at it like American oak goes to Australia, American oak goes to Spain. But how do we use it here, especially with Napa Valley wines and from a specific vineyard, is so interesting. And I think that this 2014 really shows what its potential is. I love it is a beautiful wine. It does have that grace and kind of beauty to it, but it also has a lot of fruit in there. And I think that these kinds of profiles that we're going to explore here on these vintages, this one to me really had a lot more of a chocolatey note right off the front, but it does have that briary blackberry and it does have that blue fruit kind of component too, especially that blueberry and cassis that really just is so smooth and wonderful and fills the mouth that it's not what I used to think about American oak, to be really honest. I mean, you taste Zinfandel that just had American oak. It was all about containing those spices and blowing them up and all of this. This is not that style. And I think that you're right. And a really good point that you made, Bill, is that you didn't want the fragility of these, the fruit from these vines in the rock pit is preserving that, not overpowering it. So I think that really your balance here, and especially as we progress in this tasting right now and moving on to the 15 vintage right now too, would be a really good point. So 14, pretty sunny, wonderful. 15, pretty well noted for one big problem that we had called drought. Drought was not the greatest thing ever that we've ever experienced in, versus 2017, which we got the greatest rainfall we'd ever had in California history. This was the exact opposite. We had vines that were struggling. We had a lot of things, but it also gave you the opportunity to pick out the bunches that you did want to work with. So tell us a little bit about this vintage and what it was like to work with it and the lessons you learned right there from the oak program as well.
Yeah, I mean, 2015 there was a drought. There were some heat incidences as well. I think probably around Labor Weekend, which we normally get. And the fruit was in relatively good condition. It was perhaps a little bit more dehydrated than 2014. And the interesting thing was, right off the bat, tasting the ferments, there was a much more approachable characteristic to the 15 compared to the 14, which has always to me been a little bit uptight, and it only seems to be opening up now. But the 15 had a little bit more lushness and approachability. And so, when we started thinking about the oak program for that particular vintage, I was cognizant of that and wanted to make sure we could see some polish in the wine, because there's that lushness there. I didn't want to overpower with dry oak characteristic, and just making sure that the sweet fruit characteristic could come through. So that's kind of what we looked at.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Danny made a comment right off the bat, like, wow, this nose is beautiful. Absolutely. I think that this really lures you right in there. I mean, it's a sexy wine. Once again, love, remember our kind of underlying thing here about love, you guys. But sexy, you know, and the other thing about it that I have gotten, you know, tasting it a few times here over the past, you know, month or so, is that it's got a lot of structure to it too. And this is what I really love about it. And this is very Oakville-y, a character of Oakville. You know, we talk about Napa Valley, and then Oakville is kind of like its own thing, you know, where you really have some of the finest wines of Napa Valley that just come from this one little area there. And it's really special because it does get the influence from the Bay, from, you know, nice movement of climate during the day that comes from the Bay, but it's also these specific soils. So this is number 2 from the rock pit that was just exclusively rock pit. So what, you know, I think that this structural thing is really something that is the potential of the rock pit that we didn't see in 2014 as much, because I agree with you. I think the 14, it will change on you so much. And I think you guys will have the opportunity to really continue to taste that 14 over the next day or so, and to see how completely interesting I mean, it becomes even more expansive and everything, but it does have some, you know, it's a little bit moody. And this one, on the other hand, I think is showy right off the front, especially when it sucks you in there with this seductive kind of notes on the nose, but it's really the mouthfeel. And I think that firmness of the tannins, but they're still soft enough that they're graceful, and they've got that velvety kind of hammer kind of effect on them. I think that it's just a wonderful wine that's really good, that I'd be pairing this more with, give me some duck and just do it on the pan. Give me some blackberries. Let me make that au jus. Let me just do this and feel this character of this wine that will really pop with those kinds of food items. But I feel like there's also a kind of a caramel thing going on in here on the nose. I feel like there's so many sexual, wonderful things, you know, they're almost aphrodisiac by this wine. So once again, another good one for you guys to think about in the love of wine and aphrodisiac qualities of this one specific 2015 vintage. Yeah, for sure.
Thank you. Chris, there's a couple questions on the chat that I would love Bill to
Sure.
answer.
Sure.
Kim, thank you for your question. And she wanted to really know what the difference in your style of making goose cross versus C. Elizabeth. And, you know, from my standpoint, the biggest difference is the oak profile that goes into C. Elizabeth. But Bill, do you want to talk about any other details on that?
Yeah, I think I mean, the main difference obviously is the sourcing of the fruit. So Goose Cross, we have worked with Game Farm actually after we started the C. Elizabeth program. We're like, man, this fruit is actually pretty good. So we used it a little bit. It's in French oak as opposed to American. And that's actually helped me learn about the C. Elizabeth wines to see how that fruit works in French oak as well. In terms of what we do in the cellar, not really. I mean, it's more vintage to vintage that I'll look at, whether, you know, I'm using cold soak, pre-ferment cold soak techniques and things like that. We destem, we don't crush for both. We don't sort. I think we get pretty good ripeness here in Napa, and if you need to be sorting your fruit, then you probably need to fire your grower. So, you know, we don't sort the fruit, but no, I don't. I think really the two key differences is just that the fruit's coming from a different vineyard than, you know, the Goose Cross State Lane wine, State Lane Cab, and then the oak regime.
And Leslie asked about the difference in barrels over the 4 vintages. So Leslie, I think we did kind of cover a lot of that, and it's been trials, right? And Bill will purchase a bunch of different, Bill will get them, a bunch of different barrels from different coopers around the country. And like Bill said, we'll make 15 to 20 barrels of wine, and we only use about 10 in our final blend. So it's just a constant evolution. But I think the big thing that we have found that we've stuck to is the Pennsylvania oak that is thin stave, 4-year aged, water bent, small pour, and a lot of other descriptors, which is all in your tasting notes. So
I think too, and Bill touched on this, but the fact that this is just a micro lot, single vintage, single vineyard cab, it normally wouldn't probably allow us to do as much as Bill said, kind of R&D, but we do. And, you know, I give Bill a lot of credit. He's a pretty rigorous blender and taster, and we're constantly looking at different profiles and how things are aging within different barrels and different programs. And we've kicked out a lot of barrels with great wine in them, but they just don't fit what we're trying to do. And, you know, those are kind of hard to part with sometimes, but I give a lot of credit to Bill and kind of keeping us in our lane on what we're trying to do. And we've sold off some great wine over the years that just didn't fit our program.
Yeah. Well, I think that,
sorry, Chris, if you got just real quick, if you want to know, the Coopers who we've kind of zeroed in on AP John, which is actually in Australia, which is a bit of a shame. But so AP John, and we get two style of barrel from them. Dempdos Cooperage, which is French based, but they actually have a cooperage in Napa. And we get one style of barrel from Dempdos, and then Nadalier, French based, they also have a cooperage in Napa Valley up in Calistoga. And so we've used two style of barrel from them. So that's essentially what we've zeroed in on. And then, you know, it's not just the new oak that we're getting from those guys, there's also the older oak. So it's funny enough, we probably each year end up with probably 12 different components when you look at the individual barrels that we can blend together.
I think that's a fun fact to go into right there, is that French coopers are now investing in American oak. And it's true. I mean, this is where American oak has gotten, and I feel like these are great examples of that. Speaking of which, we've got the 2016 vintage, which is just simply amazing. This is where we go to a new thing about this program. So tell us a little bit about this. This is Trailside Vineyard. This is the block called the Trailside block that is part of this. This has got soil over rocks. So it's not just rocks, it's got soil over rocks. So Deborah and I got the chance to go out there with you too. Tell us a little bit about this and how it differs from the rock pit.
Yeah, so the Trailside, it does have this topsoil, and there's a ferrous iron content to it. I guess it's some wash that's come down off of Oakville grade. And then it's got the rocks down below. One of the things I think, you know, in 14 and 15 was, you know, we obviously we've got to learn about the rocks and enjoyed the fruit. And to me, it does give you some classic Cabernet characteristics in terms of a little bit of a hole in the donut. It's and I wanted to see if the Trailside, when the fruit actually became available, and Alex said, "Hey, I might have a few tons," and I was like, "Yeah, let's see if we can work with that." To see if the fruit from there, where there's a little bit more soil profile, a little bit more that ferrous iron content, would actually give the wine a little bit more natural mid-palate fleshiness. And I think it does, hence we've started using it. And that was just something I wanted to look at, seeing if we can get from Game Farm, from the vineyard, and not something that I didn't want to have to create the mid-palate fleshiness in the winery. I wanted to see if we could get that naturally from this one location, and I think we have. Yeah. This certainly gives you a few different flavor profiles as well. There's a little bit more of a, to my mind, you know, funnily enough, it's called Game Farm. There's a little bit of this gamey, earthy characteristic that we start to see, and I like that because I think it just gives the wine another layer of complexity, a little bit more depth, and definitely some more palate weight, which I was kind of looking to do in an elegant way.
Yeah, I know that you were interested in Malbec too, but you wanted to stick, you may be adding in Malbec to this, but that didn't go. This is a Cabernet, and Christi is shaking her head, no Malbec. This is a Cabernet-based one. Yeah,
I love Malbec, but not in this wine.
No.
Yeah, we just like to challenge Bill with, you know, the impossible. We said we want to keep this 100% Cabernet. We want to keep this 100% single vineyard. We want to keep it 100% American oak. You know, we just like making it difficult for Bill.
Yeah, just a little story. I don't think I've really told anyone else. That's one of the blend tastings. I actually slipped in Goose Cross Game Farm from French Oak into one of the blends, and they didn't like it. So I just
Nice try.
So
usually Bill wins the blending conversations, but not that one.
no,
Yeah,
no,
yeah.
no, they
Well,
picked
you know what I like about it too is it really does have that fleshiness, but there's a really unique kind of a herbal essence here too, and it's a beautiful herbal essence. It's got a little bit of a mint and a sage kind of note to it too, and it really stretches out that palate. And that mineral kind of note too is really distinctive in this, and it really shows a sense of sight that really is wonderful right now. It's not just that kind of wild berry kind of flavors, but also this real sense of place that I get out of this wine. And once again, 2016, very good vintage, and it once again a showy vintage of Napa Valley. It could be very approachable when young, and also very good when aged in the cellar. But I think that this one is showing that real sense of place, and I think that this, just bringing this new part of the vineyard into it, really added more depth and complexity to it, and it's just fantastic, tasting great right now. So moving on to our last wine, the 17 vintage, which is fantastic as well, but was not without its problems. We know that one of the main things that happened, we had the largest amount of rainfall in California history in the early part of the year, making it flood 3 times. We usually have about 1 flood a year. This was about 3 times. And then we get into Labor Day weekend, which can be a blessing or it could be really haunting you. In this case, it was a haunting one. I remember here in Sonoma County, we did the Taste of Sonoma. It was 114 degrees. Your best friend was the guy with the squirt gun and fan thing. And it was one of those times where the grapes just stopped for a few days. And then we get into this other problem that we had called the fires. The fires were the first of a series of fires, but it was a very dangerous one. And a lot of people, there were people that died. There were people that, lost their houses forever. These are things that happen there. This wine has a very, very special place in my heart. And I know that Christi and Dave and Bill and all of us, if you understand this, these grapes were picked just before that fire really started. So tell us a little bit about that, Bill, and that how special that was.
obviously it was a relief. Yeah, I mean, 17 was that was a real challenge. People talk a lot about the fires of 17, and obviously they were tragic and disastrous, and create a lot of issues for a lot of the wineries as well, and from winemaking, which is probably not as relevant compared to the destruction that they caused to the general populace, 2017 was a really difficult growing season. We had a dry winter, dry spring. I think it was in July, we had a hailstorm one afternoon, and the next day it was 104. There were just bizarre things taking place. Labor weekend, we always expect a bit of a heat spike. Labor weekend, I think we had 6 days of 105 plus. And you're right, Chris, the vines, they freaked out, they shut down, and they actually shut down for a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Normally the vines go into the self-preservation mode, and they'll shut down for a couple of days, and they recoup, you throw some water on and stuff, and irrigate to help them out. But in 2017, they stopped. They actually regressed into, when you're monitoring the ripeness in terms of sugars and the like, I mean, they actually went backwards, which was just peculiar. 17 at Game Farm, those things happened. I think, we've got a fairly wild trellis system there. It's not a straight vertical. Alex allows things to flop out, which is great because it provides a lot of protection for the fruit, and I think that helped us to some degree. But thankfully, because of the rocks, because of the heat that we had throughout the growing season, the dryness, Game Farm was an earlier ripening location in terms of the timing to the fires and the risk of smoke taint. So we got to good ripeness. There was dehydration. We did a selective pick, particularly on the rocks, where the heat reflection off the rocks actually dehydrated the fruit probably a little bit more than over on the trail side. So, we had the guys be pretty judicious in what they picked and what they left. Alex was good enough to be willing to do that, to leave fruit on the vine that was completely dehydrated. So we got some pretty sound fruit, and got it in. There was a fragility to the 17 and the ferments, even just tasting the fruit. And so we looked to do a little bit more cold soak on it. You'll see that in the technical notes that we did a longer cold soak, and that was try to build up as much body and texture in the wine before fermentation. And then, if you want to talk about something else, but that certainly led us down a path. That fragility and elegance of the 17 led us down a path in terms of how we came up with the final blend in terms of the oak program in particular.
Yeah, I think that, for me, what I get out of it is a lot more. The red fruit is very prominent in this. It's not as much dark fruit as much as red fruit. And it's just, I think it was that kind of shutting down period there that was actually made it such a unique characteristic. But the texture on this is just genius. And it really has more of almost a milk chocolatey kind of essence to it in some ways. But then it has this structural thing that's going on too. And I feel like all of these parts make such a great wine together. And I think that as I've tasted this and I've been tasting these wines over the past few weeks, and just, I think that, it just really has the character of the vintage, but also the site as well. This is year 2 that you're really using the trail in there too. So this is really something special. How did that make a difference there? What was the difference between the trail and the pit that year?
Italian 17, we used more trail side than rock pit, and whereas in 16 it was probably the other way around, and that was to make sure we had some body in the final blend. Like I said, there was a fragility and an elegance to the wine from the get-go, and I loved it. I just loved it aromatically, and was very conscientious about, one, trying to build up some body and texture, but also about not overpowering that elegance and fragility. And you can see we only used 30% new oak in the final blend, so quite a bit less than we did in previous vintages. And it was just because we didn't really feel that the wine had the weight to hold it and to create a balance and integration between the oak profile and the fruit. So. But yeah, there's definitely a little bit more trail side in this one, and it was just because it had a little bit more weight to it.
Yeah. Well, I think that this leads us into an amazing subject here. So one of the things that I love so much about Christi and Dave is that they're part of this community. So same with you, Bill, of course. But this community means so much to them. It brought them together. It's why we're all together as Napa Valley, and why Cabernet became the king of Napa Valley and everything. But there's also that thing, we want to preserve Napa Valley, and I think that really this is a devotion that you guys really went out of your way to really take this wine in particular and really do something special with it. Tell us a little bit about that, Christi and Dave.
When Bill's telling the story about, do you guys have another 10 minutes? I'm hoping we'll try to encapsulate everything here, but this is we want to talk a bit about what we're trying to do with our 2017. And Bill called me up to the winery during the fires to taste some of the ferments on the 2017. Christi was with our kids. We'd been evacuated fires came really close to us, we were spared. But I went up to the winery, and Bill and I are sitting there. I think it was Tuesday of the fire week. We're tasting these incredible, incredible ferments, looking around at the valley burning around us. And I don't want to speak for Bill, but I know I had this tremendous conflict in my head and my heart, because I was tasting what I thought was one of the most amazing wines, certainly that I'd ever been associated with, and watching this thing we care so much about and people we care so much about suffering. And from that day forward, we always talked about wanting to do more, wanting to do more. We helped in every way we could throughout that fire season and subsequent fire seasons. But then sitting at home with our kids, this summer, watching these fires, the 2020 fires happen, it was feeling the same feeling all over again, and maybe even a little worse, because it happened again. It wasn't an anomaly, it kept happening. And we were seeing and hearing about friends, family, and people we don't know, landmarks, things burning, people losing everything, people losing their jobs already with everything going on with the pandemic, and then this on top of that. And we just literally looked at each other and said, what can we do? We've got to do something. And we thought that it really made kind of metaphorical sense to take our 2017, which we would have launched probably a little earlier, but we wanted to wait, let everything kind of settle down, and try to use our 2017 vintage, which we feel is arguably, I would say, our best vintage, but the vintage that we figured the most out, the vintage that's tied so closely to so many memories, tough memories for us, and a vintage that we feel very blessed to even have. We thought we would use that vintage to try to help all those that are suffering right now from the 2020 fires. So with that, we have partnered with the Napa Valley Community Foundation, the good folks there, on their fire relief efforts. And what we decided to do was we wanted to give till it hurts, for lack of a better way to put it. And we're going to take 50% of everything we receive, all the monies we receive from selling our 2017 vintage, and we're going to donate that through the next 6 weeks. So February through the middle of March, during our release period, we're going to donate 50% of those sales to the Napa Valley, the Napa Valley Fund, to try to help. And it helps. They've already donated around $2 million within the Valley to help folks that are out of work, have lost their homes, lost their housing, might not have health care, things of that nature. So it's a really, if you're not familiar with it, we have more information, and it's a really awesome charity, a really awesome group. And we're really honored to be able to try to help in whatever way we can.
And the really great thing is that all the monies stay here in the Valley.
Yeah.
Right. And this Valley that we love so much, and that really brought us together and started our life together, is what we care about. And so knowing of an organization that all the monies stay here local was really important to us. And the folks over at the foundation are phenomenal, and they do such great work for our Valley and everything that we care about. So, like Dave said, we're giving till it hurts. 50% is a lot. Our bottles are $150 a bottle, and giving $75 each bottle back to the foundation is something that we care about. Dave and I have always been very big at donations and being part of the community and giving back to our community, whether it's local or distance. And it's something that we had to do. Watching the 2020 fires and what they did. And we have these blue Adirondack chairs at our house, and we were sitting at the chairs being choked by the smoke. Our kids were outside playing. We're like, okay, they got 10 minutes to be outside in this smoke. And that's where this idea was born. Dave's like, why don't we do this? It's like, good, done. So I think it's a really good way for us to give back, because we are so lucky and we are so fortunate that in 2017, our house, which we were evacuated from for 7 days, wasn't burned, but the fires came scarily close. It's just what we do.
And we really wanted this to be kind of a nationwide wine lover program, Napa Valley lover program. We've got other wineries that have done a lot of good around here as well. And so we just want to spread the word the best that we can, that even though those fires are over, and even though we're getting back to business and, in every way that we can, there are a lot of people really hurting and suffering from the effects of those fires. And those are the people we want to help.
I think that's an amazing statement right there. And I think that, it's giving back to the community and preserving what we have in Napa Valley is so important. It's important not just to us as great wine writers and you as the winemakers and the family that owns this great brand, but it's to everyone out there to be supportive of these things. I mean, Napa Valley is one of the greatest destinations in the world, but we have to preserve it. And I think that this really is from the heart, from the heart. It is one of those things, and it's really one of the reasons for everyone out there why we plan to do this right after, obviously, Inauguration Day, but also, before Thanksgiving would have been great, but it's really more about Valentine's Day, and it's about the love and passion for really what's happening and why these wines are very important pieces. I think that when we talk about great wines, we have all sorts of descriptors for the profile and everything. When we talk about world-class wines, we have stories that we tell about those wines. And I think that these stories that we just heard today are really special stories. And I think that that's why all of you have these bottles to share with other people this weekend. And please do it and tell these stories. But that's the whole point of this, is to really spread the news about this small brand, but big hearts. And that's what means so much to me, and being part of it is to help this community and to help you guys see out there that these are special vineyards that really are designates that deserve that magnitude of recognition for what they do. You've got the real farmer, you got the real winemaker, you got the real owners, you got amazing wines and special stories inside each bottle. So here to you guys. Thank you so much. So I guess we can open this up for questions now. I'm cool with going a little bit live. Are you guys cool with this, Christi? And
Yeah,
and bringing it on, and let's just kind of start it open. Thanks for hanging on a few more minutes, everyone, too, because obviously we've got some stories here. Believe me, we had to cut off a lot of stuff that we were going to talk about because we could have talked to you for about 4 hours, but that's not going to happen. So any questions out there, please bring them on.
I have a quick question, just a logistics question. First of all, great to see y'all. And I think it's wonderful what you're doing. And I'm digging these wines so much. I just love getting into them. So thank you for putting this together, Lisa and everybody. In terms of getting the word out about the 2017 donation program, do you want us to wait until February 1st to promote? I'm trying to think about the schedule of an article.
The official release is February 1st, but we're going to honor everything. So out of respect for you guys and for your schedules and timing, do what you need to do what works for you. And we're more than happy to honor anything that happens right away too.
And guys, we have a draft press release. We just have been a little preoccupied, but there is a release in the works. And as soon as that's, finalized, I will make sure each and every one of you get a copy of it on this specific program.
And also for all of you, on our website, there's a press button at the bottom of the page, the homepage, and there's pictures, the bios, the letter, everything's on there. So if you need to utilize anything, that's all there. And like Lisa said at the beginning, hashtag C Elizabeth Wines and at C Elizabeth is really where we want you to focus your efforts, because we've been a little bit slow to the social media world. And thank God for Dave and his efforts on putting this all together, but we're getting there. We're making some progress. And so if anything you can do to help build that would be fantastic.
And of course you can contact us or Lisa if you need anything at all.
Yep. And our list that is in our system of folks that have purchased before, friends and family, the people that have been involved with our brand in the past, all those will get their letters starting around February 1st for purchases as well.
Good. Yeah. And we can go to your website. People can go to your website to purchase, correct? That's a good question from Deborah.
Yeah, we're 100% direct to consumer. We don't at this moment have a tasting room, which is not bad right now because you can't go tasting in Napa anyway. So everything is through our website, or they can call us or email us, and we're happy to take care of it.
That's great. Other questions out there?
Well, I noticed on the website that the 14 and 15s are no longer available. Where would one stumble upon one? In restaurants in Napa, elsewhere? It's gone, huh?
Well, we do have some available that we have kind of in our small library that we're keeping, one to see how they age over time, but also we will release some little verticals and things over time.
But if someone wants an earlier vintage, we're happy to honor, again, the donation. It's not just on the 17, it's on any wines we sell. They just need to shoot us a note.
Yeah, it's just,
and we're happy to, we'll find some.
we'll find some.
We've got some.
We've got a little bit
around.
left.
Yeah. You know, I love you, Goose Cross. I always love your Cabernet Franc, and you seem to find some for me, so I know you can do it.
I really like the 15 and the 16. I really like the 15 and the 16. Both of those speak to me. But can we get bottles? Can we talk about that? Because the 15 and the 16 are just absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, Amber, yeah,
really
on that.
speak to me.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate that, Amber. Yes, absolutely. You know, like Dave said, we kept about 25 cases of each vintage. We only make about 200 cases a year, and we kept about 25 cases back in our library. So we say sold out, but we do have the ability to send additional wines. We did that one because we're a single varietal brand at the moment, and to do tastings or to engage with the press or our friends and family, we want to taste multiple vintages. So that's why we held a little bit back. So yes, there is the ability to purchase that. The 16, I believe, is still live on the website. The 15 is not, but yeah, again, just shoot us a note, Dave at C. Elizabeth Wines, or Christi with a CH and an I at the end at C. Elizabeth Wines, and we're happy to take care of that.
Thank you so much. I
I mean,
appreciate that.
Realistically, your production size, this is pretty much what it's got to be. There's just simply to have this site-specific wine, you can't really do any more than you're doing. So.
I mean, Bill's probably better to answer this, but I'll jump in because he loves when I play winemaker. But I would say anything that we would expand would change the program. That's not to say that's a bad thing, but we think we're going to keep this program just kind of how it is, size-wise, so we can really just kind of keep evolving it.
I think it's a great idea.
Thank you.
You too. Great
And,
comment.
you know, just to chime in also, though I'm not the winemaker, Bill mentioned earlier that some lots don't make the final cut. So even within this tiny, you know, finite amount of fruit, they are very discriminating about what ends up in these wines. So I think great, you know, hats off. Like they could take the easier path and put more fruit in and make more wine, but they're not doing that. They're staying very slavishly devoted to this vision that they have had for the wine, Christi, Dave, and Bill. So hats off to you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure it's somewhere in all of this wonderful literature. The press kit's fabulous. Left me with almost no questions. But
Yeah,
in terms of acreage, how big is Game Farm?
The rock pit is probably, I'd say it's about 4 acres, and then the trail side, probably a little bit bigger. It's a little bit longer, so that's a little bit bigger than that. So,
okay.
Yeah, and there's other wineries purchasing the fruit if you want a roll call on that. Honig, Minor, Groff, Cliff Letty, Duckhorn used to, they don't anymore. T-Vine gets some exotic fruits off there as well from different blocks.
Okay, thank you.
We've got 5 or 6 rows, I think, in Rock Pit, and then a couple in trail side. So they're really long rows. It's a pretty interesting site.
Yeah, I love it.
Can't wait for that wonderful day when I can actually come out there and look at it.
I know.
Likewise.
We'll
Like
bring
like
it
we
up.
yeah, like we said, we would have had you guys all come out, but this just did not work. So sending you the wines was a idea for, like when Lisa called me originally and said, Chris, we're really interested in you helping here. And just really talking it out and getting you guys the bottles of wine, because they really are kind of passionate bottles, each one of them. They really do exemplify what that vintage is about, what that site is about, what Cabernet is about in Napa Valley. And I think that American oak is such an important thing. And I think for your family heritage, especially Christi, you represent America. I mean, come on, Coors, you guys ever have one? Of course we do. And, I think one of my favorite things that ever happened was taking Bill and Christi to Telluride with me a few years ago. And we had the biggest blast, but being in Colorado with her, this was an amazing experience. We're looking out at one of the mountains. It's on the cans, like, geez, so it's pretty fun. And just, it's a character of these people. And I mean, they're the real deal, that's why, I've fallen in love with, obviously, Goose Cross, but I think that this brand has even more, is touching my heart, in a different way, because it really is a passion brand. And I think that's what really makes great Napa Valley brands, is these small ones that you find and you just like, they blow your mind out, but it's really about the site. It's about terroir. We didn't even bring up that subject because it's really not an American subject, but it is exactly what it is. These sites are very specific. And I think that you really saw that, especially going from the 2014 and 15 to moving on to bringing in a different parcel too in the 16 and 17. So I think that this is just a genius way of doing it and providing you guys all with not just the great literature, but thank you for mentioning that, Dale. I agree. That's some pretty good literature there. But also just having you guys be able to taste these wines with us and talk about it and ask these questions. It's a really special thing.
Thank you.
And Dale, thank you for your comment on bootlegging Coors Beer.
I did. Yeah, I'll say this very quickly. I sent it directly to Christi, but as a freshman at the University of Houston in 1970, I came from El Paso, and El Paso was dominated by Coors. Okay, and Coors was a legend in Southeast Texas because amazingly it wasn't sold in Southeast Texas. So when I went for Christmas, I filled the entire trunk of the car back up and lugged it back down. And I have to confess, I made a little profit on this stuff, but then damn it, you started selling in the Houston area and I went out of business.
Sorry to put you out of business, Dan.
Very fond memories of Coors and of course the Silver Bullet.
Yeah, the Silver Bullet. Yeah.
So anyway, thanks guys. Wonderful presentation.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks a
We
lot.
really appreciate it. If you have
Yeah,
additional
thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Anyone has any questions, please, send me an email or shoot me a text, and I'll make sure we connect you with the right people or get you the answers you need. And we really appreciate your time.
And thanks again for your generosity, guys.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Everyone.
Take care.
Cheers.